Hey everybody, this is Icky. I'm just gonna go ahead and jump straight into it, since apparently I'm on a time crunch before Shadow Visions drops the nuke of all time on me by throwing down to a 1 hour, just full marble content here. So yeah, I'm just gonna go straight into it. We are done with round one, after a very impressive showing by our Challenger Division players, which did see three of them go through to the second round on the winner's side of things, with DK, Misty, and Endy all pulling off seeding upsets to advance. Other than that, it was pretty much chalk. Shadow Visions, Turk, Connie, Frosty, and myself all pulling off wins against opponents that I think, for the most part, they were expected to beat. Turk and Barbarica was always going to be a toss-up, but Turk handled business very well there. We'll get into that here in a second. This is just a little preview of our next matchups. Shadow Visions is going to be taking on Turk. Connie's going to be taking on DK. Frosty is going to be taking on Misty. And I'm going to be taking on Endy. Down in the losers bracket, we're going to have Kago versus Barbarica, Jacob versus E-Guy, A-Game versus John, and Wilch versus MBO. So, I'm going to just preview these matchups real quick before I head off here. So Shadow Vision's going to be taking on Turk. And he looked pretty good against Kago, and Kago looked great in that series. And Turk is also coming off an impressive win against Barbarica. This is going to be a big step up for him, though. I do think the draft heavily favors Shadow Visions, considering map pool depth and everything. I do think this is probably going to be a sweep. At the best for Turk, I do think it might be a 4-1, but it would take a very heavily favored map pool for Turk to snag a win. I just think Shadow Visions is on another planet compared to some of the rest of us, and that's just kind of where I'm at. Next up, we're going to have Connie versus DK. And DK did pull off the largest seeding upset of the tournament so far, being the 12 seed, taking down the 5 that was E-Guy. He looked very good while doing it, but I will note that DK does match up pretty well with E-Guy, whereas I don't think he matches up as well with Connie. Connie specifically is very much a more melee heavy player, whereas E-Guy is much more heavily focused on lines, and I think DK can combat E-Guy's playstyle a little bit better than he can combat Connie's. I do think also Nuremberg ping advantage for Connie is going to be very difficult for DK to overcome. So we'll see how that goes on that front, but I do have Connie being favored in this series, but we'll see what DK pulls out here. Next up, we're going to have one of the more anticipated matchups, seeing our second place finisher in the contender division taking on the champion from Challenger in Misty. And I do think Frosty is the heavy favorite for this series, but Misty, on a good day, can compete with just about anybody. I just don't know if it based on form and based on where I'd say skill floors are on a good day for Misty. That's it's weird because Frosty is so good. I genuinely do think that Frosty's floor is a lot of our good days, and I do wonder if that's going to be the case here, where it's just like it doesn't matter because he's just so much faster and he's just so much more precise. I do think Misty has the ability to pull this series off. It would just take such an effort to pull that off. I do think Frosty is still the heavy favorite, but this should be a good match. It'll be Misty's first big test. Notably has not played any of the top two, either of the top two, and his highest ranked opponent so far has been John. Did win that series against John, but we will see how he does now that he's going to be going up against one of the titans of the game at the moment. Next up, we're going to have me versus Endy. I put it at being a 7-game series. this could honestly go either way. I do want to say that this is just tentative. Uh, Endy is easily one of my worst matchups. Um, he plays so much like me that I can't get any separation from the guy, and he's fast. He's probably faster than I am, which is saying something. Because I do think that I am probably one of the fastest players in the game. He's somehow faster. Um, I'm gonna have to pretty much completely change how I play in order to win this series, and I already know that. So should be interesting. I do think I do want to see this being a fun race for everybody to watch. I do want to see this being a very high scoring affair. And we could very well see that, but we'll see how the maps unfold. For now, I have myself being the slight favorite, but if he plays like he did when I played him the other day, then I'm completely cooked. So we'll see how that goes. Next up, we have my big projected upset here, which is Kago taking down Babarica. And the reason I chose this as being one of my my big upset for the round has a lot to do with the mental game. Kago's raring to go after taking a game off of Shadow Visions. He notably wanted to immediately play Babarica. As soon as Babarica's first match against Turk ended, he was like, I'm ready to play now if you're ready. And Babarica said no, but we could play tomorrow. So we're going to be seeing that very early on in the week, which tracks because Kago likes to get his stuff done early in the week before his work gets overloaded. But we will see how this goes. I do think Kago has the slight mental edge here, and we can see if Kago can steal an early win from Babarica, this series could very well just avalanche into a Kago domination, but we'll see what happens here. Do think overall Babarica, if all things being equal, I think Babarica is the better player, but I do think Kago has that slight mental edge that we might be able to see. He wants to prove himself and finally get a playoff win on the board. Notably, last year lost to Mazik in round one or in the play-ins. Didn't even make the playoffs, so he's desperate to get a playoff series win on the board. But we'll see how that goes. Next up, we have Jacob versus Eguy. Eguy notably suffering a pretty devastating upset at the hands of DK. And Jacob did kind of get obliterated by Connie. I mean that in the most respectful way possible. It wasn't particularly close. And although, I mean, of course, there is the question of how much of that was ping affected. You can't say that for all the games. And I do think Eguy should be able to win this series, but he has been struggling for form recently, and I do wonder how much of that is affecting his mental game. Regardless, I do see Eguy winning the series pretty handily, but we have seen Jacob pull off some pretty insane stuff this tournament just in terms of overall entertainment, so hopefully the series is a little closer than the 4-1 that I've put out here. Next up, we're going to have A-Game versus John. I do have John winning this series. He got really hard done by the Misty series. He got very unlucky with the double spawn situation on Skate Battle Royale. Got very unlucky on Cube Isle to end up getting forced into a tie situation. That series could very well have gone all the way down to a actual Game 7 instead of being a 4-1 for Misty, but there's not much you can really do when you get blown out on the replay by 40 points, and you just can't make the most of the luck that you do end up getting. So although it was rare for him to get some luck, and the Tilo did try to bail him out very hard at the end, just couldn't quite get it over the hump. A-Game, on the other hand, got swept by Frostfire, though the margins were pretty thin on especially on Foundry. That's the first one that comes to mind. That game was only a 5-point loss despite the sweep. So very well could see A-Game taking more than just the one game, but I do think John, just being the more experienced tournament player, having a bit more experience in these kind of clutch situations, I do think John should be able to take this series. And our last series is going to be Wilch versus MBO. And Wilch playing on the television screen, I suspect anyway. MBO is coming off of a heartbreaking loss to Endy. He does need to stay locked in. Wilch is capable of pulling off at least an upset or two. I don't see him winning this series respectfully. But MBO does need to make sure that he is entirely locked in, or else Wilch will at least take those 1 or 2 games, I do think. So overall, do think MBO heavily favored in this series, especially with Wilch's TV setup scenario. But we'll see how that goes for them. Again, do see MBO winning this series. But overall, that's where I'm at with our current playoffs being set. This is just my short little preview for round 2, and I hope these games are as good as I predict them and hope they are in the end. So, thanks for watching, guys.